Hey folks, it's Chris with the Human Project Podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, and that is the process of making trade-off decisions. How do we evaluate what comes into our lives and whether it helps us accomplish our larger goals? How do we do that with God? How do we do that in community? And how do we do that so we feel this freedom and this lightness of what Jesus promised us in this abundant life? How do we do that? Take a listen to this episode. Let us know what you think. Hello, Mark.
Hi there, Chris.
How's it going?
That's good. It's very good. Yeah. We just finished a conflict episode. I feel like, not fighting.
Yeah.
Getting curious.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are we talking about in this episode?
Well, I think one of the things that we tend to dance around a lot, but haven't actually surprisingly addressed this, one of my favorite topics to talk about
Oh, boy.
is this concept of trade-offs. And what a trade-off is it's when you're substituting one thing for another thing.
Okay.
And we are making trade-offs all the time because it is impossible for us to do everything.
What?
Newsflash.
What? Inconceivable.
You keep using that word. It is impossible for us to do everything.
Yeah.
And I think many of us try and fit so much in our lives that we make trade-offs by default instead of by design. Case in point, one of the main topics I use when I talk about trade-offs is we do a lot of work with teams that are building products, especially in like the software world. And they do their planning and they find that, oh man, there's more stuff that's there than what we can actually accomplish over the course of time.
Yeah.
So as a result, oh, wow, we learned something new. This needs to come in, but we're already at capacity. So we have a choice. We can either pretend that we're not at our capacity and just try and get it done.
Yeah.
And something else suffers.
La, 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 la. Just keep marching. Yeah.
Yeah. Keep marching, ignore it. Or we can say, okay, if this is coming in, something else needs to go out. And I think this is the decision that all of us have on a pretty regular basis.
Every day.
Yeah.
Every moment, really.
Yeah. Something comes up that we weren't expecting. And we say, okay, what do I do as a result of this? And a lot of us just try and cram. And we've talked about this epidemic of busyness that exists. And I think this is a big reason for it, is that we don't make trade-off decisions.
I would even expand that to say it's not even just the things that are, they come up unexpected, though that is the point at which we usually will see it more easily.
Yeah, it's more evident.
But even when we're making decisions about what goes in our schedule, we are doing the same exact thing. We just don't know what we're trading off.
Yeah.
Even if we're conscious about it, we're like, yeah, I'll schedule that for 10 o'clock, Monday, as opposed to what, right, is kind of still the hanging question. So, but what is that costing us though, if we're doing that and we're not thinking about it fully?
Yeah. I think using our continuum example of two ends of the extreme, one is we take everything else on, like we say yes to everything. The other is that we overanalyze everything and tend to have this major grading mechanism of how we say, yes, this is worthy of my calendar or worthy of my time.
Let me put it through my algorithm spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly. And you spend twice as long doing that. And there's been tons and tons and tons of books written about like time management and productivity. Like getting things done is one of the more popular ones.
Yeah.
And I think those go way too far beyond what's actually needed. Because I think most of us, what it comes down to is it comes down to a heart issue with trade-offs.
Wow.
Is realizing that we are not in control. So to go back to your question, what is it costing us? Is it's really a matter of two things. One is analysis. Like we're just doing and not actually seeing like, is this fitting in with my goals? Is this fitting in with what God wants for me? Is this fitting in what's healthy for my relationship with the people that are closest to me? Yeah. That's one piece of it. And also you're missing this element of, am I actually spending time on the right things?
Yeah.
Because all of us, there was this book that I read, first book
Shocker.
reference. There's this book that I read, I think last year. and it was by a guy named Oliver Burkeman. I think I've mentioned this book before, but the book's called 40,000 Weeks. Mm-hmm. So that on average, your average lifespan is around 80 years. Okay. It's the average lifespan worldwide. And that equates out to about 40,000 weeks.
Okay.
Which, you put it that way, like a year seems like a super long time for us.
Yeah.
A week seems like a blink of an eye.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't tell you how many times Victoria and I have gotten to Friday or Saturday and be like, is it really Friday or Saturday?
How'd that
like,
happen?
The week's over already. Where did this week go?
Yeah.
And so in this, he's talking about this finite ability of our time. And most productivity, time management books talk about like, oh yeah, so all of that's there, so you have to make sure to optimize.
Squeeze as much in as you possibly can.
Get as much in as you can, make sure you know what you're doing, analyze, cut things out the wazoo. And what Berkman talks about is the opposite of that, the antithesis of that. It's kind of actually more stoic, almost more on like, wow, it doesn't matter.
We suddenly went philosophical.
Yeah. Okay. But he doesn't go that far. Mm-hmm. Instead, what he talks about life as like a stream. It's constantly going, it's constantly passing, it's stuff that's happening, and it's filled with all kinds of things that occupy our time. And it's our choice. Are we intentionally stepping into the stream and going with those things, or are we seeing those things pass us by? And I think that's the helpful analysis when it comes to trade-offs. What are the rhythms? What are the mechanisms? What are the things that are important to us? How do we protect those? And then when something else comes in, we weigh it, not overanalyzing it and not underanalyzing it, but weighing it for its appropriate amount of, is this something that we want to do? And maybe this is just a really important concept to me right now, because our life is a little bit on the crazy side. We have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. We're working in ministry together. I have a full-time vocation job as well. And we're greatly involved with our church community and our house church. And I'm leading a guy's Bible study and all these things that are occupying our time. So I want to be really careful about, what do I allow, and I use that word very intentionally, into my schedule. Mm-hmm. And I've gone too far to the other extreme where it's like, I won't let anything into my schedule. Like, I'll say no to everything. Okay. Curious how that looks for you.
I go to the other extreme and I allow everything in my schedule. No.
I have a free 3 minutes between.
Yeah. Sometimes, some weeks has absolutely felt like that. And while that's a bit of a ludicrous extreme, is not too far off from what some weeks have looked like. Which isn't to say that occasionally that might be exactly what the week needs to be, but that is not sustainable. I guess what comes to mind for me is just, I think we each have our own kind of default operating mode that we will get into if we're not intentional about it. Yeah. I know for me, it's to do. Like, I'm going to do, and I become a human doing instead of a human being, and all this, not good stuff. And what I don't realize that I'm deciding not to do are things like relationship. Yeah. Right. Yeah. In all the aspects, like with God, with myself, with other people, if I'm not intentional about it, that stuff just kind of disappears. Yeah. I'm sure there are other people who are wired the other way. They will relationship, and then there's stuff that needs to be done. The oil change for the car, the fix the whatever on the house, whatever it is, that doesn't get done. Yeah. Right. And I imagine it would look the same way, just on the opposite extreme, perhaps. But we end up not doing things that are important for our lives and are healthy for us. Another thing that I end up not doing, and also I'm intentional about, is rest. And God's really, really clear about that. Really clear about that, right? We need to rest. We're built for it. He made us for it. To rest is human. It's part of the human makeup by His design. And so if I'm not intentional about that, for example, it starts costing me. So I think the almost insidious part of this, from my perspective, is that it seems like whatever we're doing, our default operating mode, it kind of works. It seems like it works.
It's because it's what we're used to.
And it's not an abject failure for the short term. but it does end up failing over a longer period of time, right? If I just constantly do, that might work or look like it works for a period of time, but then my relationships are going to start to suffer. If I'm not resting, I'm not going to be able to, I'm like, my body will literally start to get sick and fail on me if I don't rest. So there's a longer term failure there that's going to get in the way of the goals and things that God made me for.
And it's not until that crisis moment happens or you pause and you're like, wait a second, I haven't hung out with so-and-so in forever. Oh yeah, it would be nice to do this. And you go, well, why am I not doing that? And it presents, I think a lot of time it manifests itself as guilt. Like guilt for being busy or guilt of, yeah, it'd be nice if I could do that thing, but I just don't have time for that right now. And then these things start to harbor and build resentment in and of yourself or for somebody else. But I think what I'm asking us to consider is we've talked about living life by default instead of by intent.
Yeah.
I think what I'm asking us to do is take a step back from that. So not like this big sweeping principle, but just evaluate as something comes in, as we have an opportunity to do something, what is that costing and what am I trading off? That's more, I think, what I'm asking to consider. And that's been really helpful for me because, example, Victoria is very much I like to do everything person.
Okay.
And actually this week is more emblematic of what Victoria's week looks like versus my week. Except it's reverse. I had the crazy week this week and I normally don't because one, for health purposes, I need to build rest in or else I collapse. Like almost literally collapse. But this week I made the decision several times to say yes to people that wanted to spend time together, even though it was already a crazy week. And I can say, yes, I can theoretically fit you in between here and here.
My calendar does not have anything on that spot.
Yes.
Yeah, so
but that means I will be going literally from morning to night without a break, without a gap.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us live that way. And so I'm fortunate and very blessed that that's not always the case for me. But I've kind of designed my life so that I can support that. So Victoria looked at me. We were on a date going for a walk last night. And she's like, your week looks a lot like how I would plan every single one of my weeks this week. I'm like, yeah, and it's exhausting. I'm tired. But I intentionally made that decision because I've been sick for the last 3 weeks and there have been lots of things that have piled up that I just haven't had time to spend time with people. And I'm like, this is needed. These are people that I really value and I really want to spend time with. And I've missed them. So if it is a short-term cost that I'm paying this week to be able to see them and I rest later than I normally would, then that's worth it to me. And just having that trade-off language of knowing what is it costing me, I was able to make the decision better instead of coming to the end of this week. I'm not going to look back on it and go, man, why did I do that? I'll be able to say, I made the decision with the best information that I had at the time.
Right. Which is, I think, is not the same, how do I say this? Not the same skill to be able to do what you just said. The way that you finish that off is of not holding on to things is a different skill, but it's built on top of the intentional decision.
Yeah.
Right. That you say like, okay, would I have decided that again? Different question. Right. But that was the best that I could do at the time. Because what good, now I can make a trade-off decision there. I could sit here and worry about, what decision I did make and what it's costing me now.
Yeah. Yeah.
To what end? It's not going to benefit me to do that, right? But setting ourselves up to say I'm making an intentional decision. So when I look back on it, I go like, well, that was the best decision I could make. Like I'll trust myself, sure. Yeah. And I've learned from it. Okay, so moving on. What's the next best decision that I can make in my trade-offs?
Yeah, and it's us acknowledging our limitations.
Yeah.
It's us acknowledging that we can't do everything because I think one of the things that we tend to get stuck in is this non-dependency mindset. We've talked about this dependence and we'll probably talk about it again.
Yeah.
On realizing that I cannot do everything in and of myself. This is where community comes into play and realizing you need people around you to be able to do that. You need dependence on God that you're not trying to prove yourself. You're not trying to win your worth or your identity by how much stuff you do. I'm talking to myself just as much as anybody else here. But being able to have that mindset so that you can approach these things with freedom.
Right.
Like, as if we're trying to win, or we're trying to succeed, or we're trying to do all of these things, like that is what is crippling for us in life. So being able to approach things like that from a position of freedom and being able to make trade-offs.
Yeah. It seems like from the heart work, if we talk about the deep stuff of heart surgery here, thinking this way, approaching things this way intentionally with God, it certainly has a potential to reveal some very deep things that we may not be aware of, or that God wants to deal with. Like, what are we protecting? What are we defending? What it might sound coming out of our mouths like, well, this has to be, this must be, which is oftentimes an indicator that we're trying to make sure that something happens. So we're going to, sling it over our backs and drag it up the hill. And that would be a poor trade-off decision, basically. But I think this trade-off concept here and perspective, if we handle it with a curiosity, with an openness to what God wants to say to us, and it can reveal those kinds of things about our heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Kind of take some of those edges off. God can be doing work on us as we're working on that. So you mentioned a very practical thing. When something comes at us, this kind of just give ourselves a brief pause, not an overanalysis pause, and not a no pause at all, unintentional, but just a brief pause to kind of look at that and say, like, what's in here? What would I be trading off if I did this? And make a decision on that. What other practical things might we do in order to put this to walk this out?
Yeah. That's my invitation for people listening is just that.
Okay.
But if you're wanting to go beyond, and I'm hesitant to say these because they can come up with a lot. You can come up with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But just start with that.
Yeah.
Just start with the pause and say, what am I trading off? After you've been doing that, keep in mind, disclaimer, after you've been doing that for a while, because what's the heart surgery? Talk to somebody about what is being revealed in your heart from that.
Yeah.
If you're like, well, I can't let go of this because, okay, cool. Let's talk about that. Like, that is what community is for, is being able to bear those things together. If you want to go beyond that and you're like, wow, this is like a major reflection moment for me. I don't like how my schedule is set up now. Do a schedule audit. You have 168 hours in a week. Some of those are going to go towards work. Some of those are going to go towards sleep. Some of those are going to go towards like the aspects of being a human, like self-care and
going to the bathroom,
and going to the bathroom and showering and all of those things. But then, like, I did this.
Please don't put going to the bathroom on your schedule. Thank you.
I mean, some people might need to. But I did this a couple years ago, and I was amazed to see like how much time there actually was in my schedule. And it can be freeing. Like, if you start with I like to call it, in the business world, we use zero-based budgeting, which means don't just assume that the things that were in last year's budget are the things you're going to carry over, but start and say, okay, what are my priorities? What are my goals for life? And what am I doing? And like Victoria and I, when we did this together, they were leading things. It was the things we need to do to be able to provide for our family financially. This was right after we had actually sold our stores. So it was big time of change for us, where we had all kinds of schedule opened up. And we said, okay, the things we need to do to provide for our family, our community, and our church. Those are like number one and number two, the things that we absolutely need to protect. And it was actually when we started to get more involved with EMI at the same time too. We said, okay, what is this costing us? And it's since cost us quite a bit more than what we had budgeted back then. But those are decisions that we made intentionally. And being able to invite those things in, and now that we've added kids into the picture, like, what are the things we need to do to make sure that we're spending time with our kids, relationships that we value, these rhythms that we build in our schedule. And it was more of a lattice work that we built, that we have freedom to operate within that lattice work. And we make sure that we protect our date nights now. We make sure that we protect like at least a night of rest every single week of us just being our family, nothing else, where we have time to have dinner together. Thankfully, it happens more than that, but we know at any standard, it is minimum. Absolutely, we keep at least one night a week. So coming up with goals and things like that. Not saying do that now.
Right.
Pause, start inviting the trade-off conversation, just approaching one thing at a time.
It seems like if we start with that first step, the one at a time thing, we'll know when it's time for the next step or two when things start to come up for us. As you mentioned, I'm just kind of pulling out and highlighting something I think I heard you say. Like when some of those things start to rise in our heart where we're like, why is it I keep feeling like I must say yes to this, or I must say no to that, or this has to be true? As those things start to rise up as patterns that we see, that we go like, what is going on with that? Or, I don't really like how that's looking. That's kind of the trigger moment maybe to say, okay, maybe this is time to pull in a good trusted friend to explore this with God together.
Do a heart chart, as we've talked about before. That's a great example of something like that. Like it's true with our schedule. It tends to be even truer with our schedule than it is with like finances. Like if something happens and like a deal didn't close, or we didn't get the promotion that we were looking for, things like that. Those are good heart moments of, what's this actually telling me beyond just the situation and the circumstances? What's going on deeper in my heart? There's so much of that comes up with schedule. And so that's why I want to invite trade-offs. What is this enabling? How is this helping you get closer to what God has for you in your time?
I think it's worth being really explicit about something also that is absolutely implied in everything that you said, but to be really, really emphasizing it, putting the emphasis on it, if I can mispronounce it for funsies, is God's part in this. Right? That this is not just merely a mental exercise that I think you're proposing here. Right? Because it could be interpreted, everything that you just said could be interpreted if by somebody who's not, connected with God at all, of just like, think about this stuff. And that's not necessarily bad to do. It's just what we're saying is God designed us to be doing these things with him and in community. Right. And so like, I'm not saying I practice this very regularly at all, but to even wake up in the morning, okay, God, what are you up to today? What do you want to tell me today about my schedule? And invite him into that so that he can start to highlight some things to me of like, you need to create more space. You don't have any rest in this spot. You need some rest in here. Or, hey, how about you trade this off and go talk to this person that really needs something today? All the conversations that you basically just said, whether they're inside of our heads or with other people, those are spots we invite God explicitly into. Because guess who's best at every single one of these things? Knows us best, knows what we need, knows what other people need. It's him. He's the best at this.
A starting point to do that is when you have a trade-off conversation, run it through the filter of the fruit of the Spirit. Which one is likely to help me experience more love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control? Which of those is likely to help with that? It's a great like step 2, the analysis. But absolutely. Like that's what all of this is meant to be. Whenever we talk, I hope it's clear by now if you've listened to the podcast for a while, whenever we talk about contemplation, we're not just talking about a mental exercise, because contemplation is meant to be with God and with other people, community. Not just pros and cons list with yourself, not just an analytical exercise. So, thanks for bringing that up.
Excellent.
Thanks for exploring that.
Trade-offs.
Make some trade-offs.
So I'm trying to decide, should we continue the podcast episode or trade off for the next podcast episode?
I am thinking we have achieved the value out of this conversation, so let's move on to the next one.
Agreed.
Thanks for exploring that with me.
I'm glad you brought it up. Good conversation.
Thank you. Hey folks, thanks for listening today. Our team is made up of myself, Chris Conlin, Mark Wavle, and our lead editor is Derek Donley. We are a crowd-funded nonprofit, and our free resources exist because of generous support from people like you. If you'd like to learn more about what we're about, go to humanproject.us, join us for classes, check out other episodes of the podcast, or if you want to, feel free to support us and donate financially. We'd really appreciate that. It helps us be able to sustain that. If there are topics or things that you're interested in us talking about, email us at info@humanproject.us.